Digging into his backyard to plant a new tree, Nolan unearthed something far from roots or rocks, a tarnished, seemingly ancient necklace. Intrigued by the find, he took it to a local jeweler, expecting to hear it was just a piece of costume jewelry forgotten by time. The jeweler's hands trembled as he examined it, his eyes wide with disbelief as he muttered, "This can't be true. What is it?" Nolan asked, his curiosity piqued. "You have no idea what you've found, do you?" The jeweler responded, his voice carrying a hint of something unsettling. Nolan felt a sudden unease and wanted to grab the piece out of the jeweler's hand, but the jeweler stepped back. "This needs to be seen by someone else," he suddenly said, and he reached for his phone on the counter. Nolan was stunned, but there was nothing he could do. "You need to come to my shop now," he heard the jeweler say on the phone. But who was he talking to? But why was this piece so important? Who did it belong to? And why was the jeweler so secretive about it? But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Living in the city, Nolan wanted to make the most out of his small garden. That was why he began to plant fruit trees. He had already planted a pear tree and wanted to place an apple tree beside it when he suddenly hit something while digging a deep enough hole. It was a gold necklace with a bright red stone in the middle, and it looked like it could be worth a lot of money. He decided to go to a jeweler right away, as he couldn't wait any longer. If only he had looked up the necklace online first. He walked into the shop with a big smile on his face, ready to find out how rich he had actually become. He placed the necklace on the jeweler's counter. "I'd like to know the worth of this piece," he said hopefully. The jeweler didn't look impressed at first until he began to inspect the necklace up close. He hadn't shown this interest in any other customer's jewelry, so Nolan almost began to grow worried. Suddenly the jeweler stammered, "This can't be true," and Nolan's stomach fluttered. "What do you mean?" he asked hopefully. The jeweler paused as he clutched the necklace tightly. He then reached for his phone and began to call someone. He heard the jeweler urge someone to come to his shop, and suddenly Nolan felt like something strange was going on. The jeweler urgently instructed everyone in the shop to exit, creating a tense atmosphere. Customers exchanged puzzled glances but complied, muttering under their breaths as they shuffled toward the door. The jeweler locked the door behind the last customer, leaving Nolan feeling trapped and uneasy. Nolan hesitated by the door, glancing around anxiously as the last customer left. "What's going on?" he muttered, his eyes darting to the jeweler. The jeweler ignored him, focusing on his phone. Nolan's heart raced. The jeweler looked up briefly, his expression unreadable. "Just wait," he said curtly. Nolan frowned, frustration bubbling up. "I deserve to know what's going on with my necklace," he insisted, trying to keep his voice steady. The jeweler remained tight-lipped, insisting on waiting for a specialist's evaluation. "I can't say anything until the expert arrives," he stated firmly. Nolan's patience wore thin. "You can't just leave me in the dark," he argued. The jeweler shook his head. "This piece is beyond anything I've ever seen. We need the specialist." Nolan sighed, feeling the weight of uncertainty. The minutes dragged by, each one increasing his anxiety. Concerned, Nolan quickly texted his friend Olaf about the suspicious situation at the shop. "Hey, something weird is going on here," he typed. "The jeweler won't tell me anything and kicked everyone out. Can you come over?" He hit send, hoping Olaf would understand the urgency. He felt a bit better reaching out. Moments later, his phone buzzed with a reply. Nolan sighed in relief, knowing Olaf would help him figure this out. Olaf replied promptly, promising to join Nolan so he wouldn't face the situation alone. "Hang tight, I'm on my way," the message read. Upon arrival, Olaf attempted to enter the shop, but the jeweler refused him entry. "I'm here to see my friend," Olaf said, pointing at Nolan through the glass. The jeweler shook his head. "No one else can come in," he said firmly. Olaf frowned, frustration evident on his face. "He's my friend. I need to be with him," Olaf insisted. The jeweler stood his ground, leaving Olaf outside. Suddenly, a man in sunglasses bypassed Olaf and entered, claiming to be the expected expert. "I'm here for the necklace," he said confidently, ignoring Olaf's protests. The jeweler seemed to recognize him immediately and nodded. "Yes, come in," the jeweler said, his tone respectful. "This is the specialist," the jeweler explained to Nolan, but his voice carried a note of finality. As Nolan started to dial 911 for help, the man swiftly snatched the phone from his hand. "What are you doing?" Nolan exclaimed, trying to grab it back. The man gave him a stern look. "No calls," he said flatly, pocketing the phone. Nolan's heart pounded. This was more than just about the necklace. He glanced at the jeweler, who looked surprisingly calm, almost as if he had expected this turn of events. Two burly men appeared, locking the doors and pulling a bewildered Olaf inside. "Hey, what's going on?" Olaf protested, struggling against their grip. Nolan's anxiety spiked as the men forced Olaf to stand beside him. "What do they want?" Olaf whispered, his eyes wide with fear. Nolan shook his head, feeling helpless. The man in sunglasses and the jeweler were huddled together, whispering urgently. Nolan's mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. They were in deep trouble, and there was no easy way out. The man in sunglasses turned the piece over in his hands, his brow furrowed in concentration. The jeweler hovered nearby, waiting for the man's verdict. The man whispered about the necklace's significant implications to the jeweler. Nolan strained to hear, catching only fragments of their conversation. "Historical value, unique markings, dangerous," the man murmured. The jeweler nodded gravely, his face pale. Nolan's anxiety spiked. As time dragged on, Nolan and Olaf eventually sat down, feeling powerless. The man with sunglasses approached Nolan, beginning to question him about the necklace's origin. "Where did you find this?" Nolan swallowed hard, glancing at Olaf before answering. "In my backyard, buried in the dirt," he said. The man's eyes narrowed. "Tell me everything," he demanded. Nolan disclosed everything about discovering the necklace in his backyard. "I was digging to plant an apple tree," he began, his voice trembling. "I hit something hard, and when I dug it out, it was this necklace." The man listened intently, nodding occasionally. The mysterious men then demanded Nolan take them to his home to explore further. "We need to see where you found it." Reluctantly, Nolan agreed, realizing he had little choice in the matter. He stood up slowly, his legs feeling like lead. Nolan led the group to his backyard, where the man with sunglasses grabbed a shovel. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the garden. "I can't believe this is happening," Nolan whispered. The man's movements were purposeful, as if he knew exactly what he was looking for. With a mix of dread and helplessness, Nolan watched as they started digging. Suddenly, the man stopped digging and started excavating more delicately with his hands. He brushed away the soil carefully, his movements precise and deliberate. "What's he found?" Olaf whispered. Nolan shook his head, his heart pounding with curiosity and fear. He unearthed a gold ring matching the necklace, stunning everyone, including Nolan. Nolan couldn't believe his small garden had hidden. Feeling a shift in the atmosphere, Nolan offered the men refreshments, trying to ease the tension. "Would you guys like something to drink?" he asked, his voice shaky but polite. The men exchanged glances, then nodded. "Water would be good," the man in sunglasses said. Olaf looked at Nolan, eyebrows raised in surprise. Nolan shrugged slightly. "Be right back," he said, heading towards the house. Olaf followed close behind. As he went inside, Olaf followed, questioning Nolan's unexpected hospitality amidst the chaos. "What are you doing?" Olaf hissed. "Why are you being so nice to them?" Nolan sighed, rubbing his temples. "I'm just trying to calm things down," he explained. "Maybe if we show some kindness, they'll explain what's going on." Olaf frowned but nodded. "Okay, but let's be quick," he said, glancing nervously back at the garden. Inside, Nolan and Olaf quickly grabbed water but remained wary of their guests' intentions. Nolan filled a couple of glasses at the sink, his hands trembling slightly. Their indoor conversation was abruptly interrupted by a shout from the garden. "Get out here, quick!" the man's voice rang out. Rushing outside, they found the man had discovered more jewelry and gold coins. The small pile glittered in the dim light, each piece more ornate than the last. Nolan felt a mix of excitement and dread. His precious garden would be torn apart, but the promise of more treasures was intoxicating. "Are you sure?" The men began to mark out areas for digging, their energy renewed. Nolan's thoughts were consumed by the glittering promise of riches buried beneath the soil. Heartbroken yet hopeful, Nolan watched as his garden was prepared for a thorough search. The plants he had nurtured were uprooted, the soil churned. The excavation turned up various treasures, fueling Nolan's dreams of wealth. Each new discovery was more dazzling than the last: golden bracelets, ancient coins, ornate brooches. He whispered to Olaf, who nodded, equally amazed. The men continued digging, their enthusiasm infectious. After uncovering numerous items, Nolan inquired about his share of the finds. "So, how does this work?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "What do I get from all this?" The man in sunglasses glanced at the jeweler, who chuckled softly. "We need to discuss that," the jeweler said, his tone oddly light. Nolan felt a pang of unease. "I found it on my property," he added, trying to assert his claim. The jeweler chuckled and revealed the historical significance of the treasures. "These aren't just ordinary valuables," he began, a hint of amusement in his voice. "They're part of a lost collection from the 18th century. Nolan's eyes widened. "What does that mean?" he asked, his excitement mingling with confusion. "It means," the jeweler continued, "that these items are priceless artifacts with immense historical value." Nolan felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. He explained that the found items were state property tied to a centuries-old hunt. "These treasures belong to the state," the jeweler said firmly. "They were part of a royal collection lost during a historic event. By law, they must be handed over to the government." Nolan's heart sank. "So, I get nothing?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The jeweler nodded. "I'm afraid so," he said, not unkindly. Nolan, shocked and disheartened, learned that the treasure was destined for a museum, not his pockets. "This can't be real," he muttered, feeling the weight of disappointment settle over him. "All this, for nothing?" Olaf placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "At least it'll be preserved for history," he offered. Nolan nodded numbly, struggling to process the news. His dreams of wealth shattered, replaced by a sense of profound loss. As the last of the visitors left, Olaf quietly exited, leaving Nolan to reflect alone. "Take care," Olaf said softly before heading out. Nolan watched him go, the weight of the day pressing down on him. The garden was a mess, much like his thoughts. He stood there for a moment, letting the silence envelop him. The excitement and chaos of the day faded, replaced by a deep sense of loss. Nolan, now alone, closed the door behind Olaf with a sense of finality. He leaned against the door, closing his eyes for a moment. "What now?" he whispered to himself. The house felt emptier than usual, the silence almost oppressive. After some time, the treasure hunters sent Nolan a modest sum for his garden's restoration, acknowledging their guilt. The check arrived in a plain envelope along with a brief note of apology. "It's not much, but it's something," Nolan thought, staring at the amount. He sighed, feeling a mix of gratitude and sadness. He knew it wouldn't bring back the dreams he'd had, but it was a small step towards healing.